big fucking stage.
Welcome to your very first Solana conference. So we have a really exciting panel today. So with us we have Kyle Samani from Multicoin Capital and Georgios from Paradigm. And today we will be talking about virtual machines. On one side of the spectrum you have interoperability, so the future, or the multi-chain future. On the other side you have maximalism, so one chain to kind of rule them all. And I think both serve a lot of purpose in the ecosystem, but I'm excited to hear from our panelists today about their kind of opposing views on this. So just to kind of set the scene, so we kind of started with this Ethereum-dominated ecosystem, and then in the last year we've seen the rise of EVM layer 1s, EVM sidechains like Polygon, like Binance Smart Chain, like Avalanche. And then now it feels like we're kind of on the cusp of something new. We have layer 2s on Ethereum, pulling security from Ethereum. At the same time, we have Solana kind of out here creating a new kind of paradigm and ecosystem for itself. So excited to chat about it. So let's dive in. What is your vision? What does 3 to 5 years look like? Will there be one chain to rule them all, or will we live in this multi-chain future?
Should I start?
Yeah, Georgios.
Is this thing on?
Is that on?
I'm not sure if it's on.
It
oh, it is on. Okay, great. I think there will be many chains, 100% sure. We're way past the stage where there was 1, 2, 3 chains. There's going to be many of them. And the important question will be, how are you going to be going from one chain to another? What are the bridge protocols? What are the security models of these protocols? How capital efficient they are? And so on. So we're past the phase of the multi-chain future, and we're in the phase of interoperability and how to do it properly.
Yeah, so we pretty clearly are in a multi-chain world now and will be for quite some time. I think there's kind of a few open questions. One, how many chains should there be? Not really obvious what the answer to that is. Most people, I think 2 or 3, and that feels right. But there could be 8 or 10, I don't know. And the other, I think, really big open question is, how do you make the different kinds of functional kinds of L1s play nice? What I mean by that is, you've got Ethereum, Solana-like things, which are, I'm going to call them DeFi engines. But you've got stuff like Arweave and Filecoin and Saya, which are just functionally very different. And you've got stuff like Ceramic and Textile, which again are very different. And I think the Web3 apps in 5 years will be leveraging all of these things in various ways. And so we don't yet have an easy way to make it all work together. Hopefully the graph will provide an indexing and querylarity again. But I can't wait to see all of those things kind of work together.
Absolutely. And kind of on that, Kyle, what do you think about layer 2s versus Solana, which will have larger market share?
Yeah, reasoning about market share is difficult. The kind of cop-out answer is they coexist, obviously. I think the question is, what do the apps need? And I think that probably drives where things go. Today, kind of sort of the answer is just cheap fees. But I don't think that's enough. I think expectations of what apps should be able to do are going to continue to grow. And I think composability is probably going to be like the main vector to think about those things. And how do you combine multiple apps together that weren't previously planned to work together? I'm optimistic that future will be quite powerful. And so I think the answer will be wherever you can have composability and cheap fees. I think some layer 1s and some layer 2s will have that, but I don't know about market share. That's hard to reason.
Yeah. Anything to add, Georgios?
I think the market structure is not winner-take-all. There are various. The demographic of the consumer is not uniform. Some people want more security. Other people want lower fees. But in the end, security and fees are kind of intertwined. So we have to think about that. In terms of how will that play out with ZK rollup tech in Ethereum, optimistic rollup tech, or Cosmos, or Solana, I do think that asymptotically, as we horizontally scale with many ZK rollups, the upper performance bound potentially can be higher than Solana, at the cost of composability, potentially. And the whole trick is going to be how we do low cost, or rather low overhead composability across two networks. And it will switch from this synchronous composability that we have today, the atomic transactions, Alice calls Bob, and both happen or nothing, to a more asynchronous programming model, similar to how you do transactions in databases.
Yeah, Kyle, you mentioned composability, so let's talk about that. Do you think composability will happen across different layer ones, and if so, how, and who's thinking about this in the right way currently?
Yeah, I'd say assuming it won't ever happen across layer ones is probably wrong, because enough people are tackling it from enough angles that probably one of them will get it. I have no idea who or which angle, though. It's a pretty hard design space, and no one's cracked it yet. In the near term, it's definitely going to happen on Solana. You can start to see it, just the inklings of it now, with Metaplex things and DeFi things and some social token things, but it's still really not there in a meaningful way. The question is going to be, can you make it fluid and seamless across L1s and L2s? I'm pretty optimistic the answer is yes. I just don't know when or how.
I think it's already happening. If you notice IBC on Cosmos,
That's
where
true, yes.
it is literally you interoperate two networks, they have a light client of each other, and they can just talk seamlessly. We've seen that already happen with Osmosis, and there is more to come.
Yeah.
So it's a solved engineering problem. Like it's live, it works. It's all about just putting it in more places.
Yeah, so Anatoly this morning spoke about the impressive growth that we've seen in Solana with 15 billion in DeFi. I think it was 3 billion in USDC on Solana. So it does feel like Solana really does have a head start compared to Ethereum layer 2s with the rollup model. What are your thoughts on this? Can the layer 2s kind of catch up to Solana?
I think so. We see DYDX already on Starkware. Starknet is going live. You will be able to launch any application with full composability on a single chain. Optimism has almost $1 billion in value. Arbitrum has $1.5 billion in value. So I think it's a good race. Developers drive which of these platforms grow the most. Some developers know Solidity, so they will prefer the EVM ones. Some developers know Rust, so they will go to Solana or to Cosmosm. Some other developers, they're okay with learning a completely new stack, and maybe they will build on Starknet, Cairo. So it's a bit of a, I don't think it's clear yet if there is a difference in the traction of the two, but I think it's going to be a good fight.
Mm-hmm. Kyle, anything to add?
Yeah, there's enough inertia in all of these ecosystems, both capital and developer activity, that it's hard to see any of them slowing down. I wish I had something more nuanced than that, but that's all I've got.
Fair enough. And then Kyle, I know you recently spoke about kind of rollups on Solana, which is how kind of Ethereum has approached the space. Anything to kind of add on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of my comments on Twitter a week ago were a little misinterpreted. I do think, without question, rollups will matter in 5 years' time. Zero knowledge flavors, for sure. The question is, what do they? Are they 10% of transactions, 50 or 80? I can make all three arguments. I don't know. But they will matter. And I think the degree to which they matter will primarily be a function of how composable and programmable and easy to work with they are. In terms of rollups on Solana, I mean, Solana is permissionless, and so you can build rollups on it because no one says you can't. I don't think you're going to see optimistic flavors of Solana. I probably don't think anyone will bother to build that. Yeah. But I think people will probably bother to build ZK rollups on Solana. It just seems like it will have to happen at some point. When, timing, usage, all very unclear, but it will be a thing.
Great. Georgios, would love to chat about MEV. Do you want to quickly, for the audience, kind of describe the problem and then talk about how Ethereum is handling that and then how Solana is?
Yeah, so MEV stands for miner extractable value. In blockchains, transactions arrive in certain ordering. So Kyle makes a transaction, I make a transaction, Tegan makes a transaction. But sometimes the ordering at which the transactions get confirmed affects the output of these transactions. For example, Kyle makes a swap on Uniswap that moves the price of ETH, and maybe I make a trade on Uniswap, but the price has moved. And so maybe there's an arbitrage opportunity created by the first transaction. And so MEV is the value that can be extracted by somebody ordering, inserting, or censoring transaction in order to make money by this reordering. The example is arbitrage, and another example is liquidations, because whoever gets first to the liquidating position wins. So MEV is a very important aspect of blockchain security, in particular because it directly ties to the incentives of the block producers, because normally the block producers, they don't participate, they don't interact with the ordering of the transactions, but recently Flashbots kind of blew off the overtone window on what you can do. And now we see that miners are openly accepting bundles of transactions, which will say, I will take Kyle's transaction, I will take my transaction, I will also insert another transaction, which always gets confirmed first and has always sort of a first look on the arbitrage opportunity. And the outcome of this so far has been that the mempool in Ethereum has split into two, which is basically one is all the private mempools, which is where all the MEV extraction happens, and the non-MEV mempools, which is where all the normal transactions happen. And what's good about this is that the user does not end up, users have stopped paying fees, have stopped competing for block space with the MEV traders.
And is Solana solving that with proof of history, or can you chat a little bit about how?
Yeah. So MEV is specifically a function of who has the right to order, insert, and remove transactions. So it's up to the validator. As long as you don't add the method to encrypt the transactions such that when they arrive at the validator cannot produce the block without reordering the transactions, MEV always exists. There's a joke that we make about MEV that there's the great theorem of conservation of MEV, that any technique that you do, it just moves it elsewhere, but you cannot get rid of it. So in Solana, instead of, whereas in Ethereum, it's like very obviously at the mempool layer, on Solana, it is like it transforms from a gas optimization game to a latency optimization game, because you got to get to the validator first. And the only anti-MEV argument I've heard on Solana is that because the validator does not have enough time to maybe do the front running because it is 400 milliseconds or lower blocks. It is not a good argument because most good MEV traders, their bots, the moment they see a transaction, in 10 milliseconds they already have an ARB, or they already know if there is an ARB. So, Solana will eventually have to face the MEV problem or the MEV opportunity. I think it's a problem that we will see a bit later on in the game.
Anything to add, Kyle?
Yeah, so totally agree. You can't get rid of MEV, although I will give a shout out to Sunny and the Osmos team. They have some of the most interesting and innovative stuff they're doing, but it's kind of separate. As you reduce block times and add proof of history, you can make it more difficult to do MEV as a validator, but you can't get rid of it, as Georgios alluded to.
Sorry, Kyle, I don't think that proof of history has anything to do with MEV. My understanding of proof of history is that the only thing it lets you do is to have a predictable leader schedule without having to assume network conditions or clocks or whatever. Whereas the fact that there is a predictable leader schedule, like in Ethereum 2, is actually makes MEV sort of worse. Because if I know that you are the next block producer and that Tegan's the next block producer, I will call you and I will say, hey, since we're the next 3 block producers, why don't we censor like a bunch of transactions and for us to make all the money from all the ARBs? Or why don't we just do all the liquidations? So, predictable leader schedules and MEV are a bad combination.
That's totally fair. And I agree. We're going to have a very different MEV environment on Solana and there's going to be a lot of teams working to mitigate that and come up with clever solutions in that ecosystem.
So this one might get a little controversial, and JR might kill me for asking this, but Kyle, I know you were a big supporter of EOS back in the day, and many kind of draw that parallel to your support on Solana. Can you chat a little bit about that and how this time is different?
Yeah, so I always was struck that the idea that there was only one, I guess, ethos around scaling struck me as kind of wrong. That you need to really try other fundamental approaches. EOS was, I think, the first credible attempt at trying to scale an alternative way differently from Bitcoin or Ethereum. And so we made that bet in a pretty big way and ultimately got an egg on our face for it. It didn't work out. It didn't work out, though, because the thesis was wrong. Didn't work out because the execution had a lot of problems, which I won't go into. One thing I think that's actually very important as an investor is to recognize some of the best opportunities ever are when you see independent teams over a multi-year period, try and tackle the same problem space, continue to fail for whatever number of reasons, and then new smart people keep trying anyways with some alternative differentiated approach. And usually when that happens, that's usually like one of the best signals. And if one of those teams starts to get traction and the product starts to work in a meaningful way, that's usually actually one of the best risk-adjusted moments to double or triple down on an investment. In the case of Solana, we certainly didn't have the ability to see that it was going to be used when we were buying most of it, so we had a leap of faith there. But it's generally a good idea when people keep trying to solve a problem and failing and keep trying anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were both very early to the Solana ecosystem, really early investors before many others.
I don't think it's comparable with Kyle.
Can you chat a little bit about what you saw in the founders of Solana early days?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate to work with Anatoly and Raj since kind of April, May of 2018. And there were always a few things that struck me. One was Anatoly was just very focused on making things go fast. His whole career, if you kind of looked at the work he did at Qualcomm and at Dropbox and at Mesosphere and the different kinds of stuff he's built, he's just like, I make things go fast. And that struck me as like very just different than a lot of the other founders in building these layer 1 systems. Also working with Raj in the last few years, what I love about him is he's just so diverse. I mean, he is managing a public face now, growing a team, dev relations, business development, fundraising. He's been amazing to work with because he just handled so much and let actually Anatoly and the tech team really focus on the core tech. And it's been a pleasure working with both of them and super excited to see what Solana has become.
Georgios, anything to add?
All my work has been on scaling, and so to me the attractive part is that the programming model is very differentiated compared to other approaches to scaling, for example, like Polygon, BSC, all of these, they just take Go Ethereum and they take the constants and they make them 5x. But that is not a way to scale because you're still bound by fundamental issues that the software will have. Like you just cannot just increase all the numbers. Whereas Solana took a somewhat differentiated approach with a parallel virtual machine and with the mempool optimizations and so on. So I think that's interesting. And obviously, when something gains traction like this, you put away some ideological concerns, which you know that I have, and you listen.
Yeah, would love to kind of shift gears and ask kind of from the developer, builder, entrepreneur perspective, as an entrepreneur, you do need to focus. And so how would you suggest kind of approaching this multi-chain space currently from the developer perspective?
I guess I'll take this. It's really tough. Building on Ethereum and Solana, let's say concurrently, or EVM and C-level concurrently, to the best of my knowledge, no one's really done it yet. think it's just a function of engineering focus and recruiting and talent and such. But it's just going to be hard. And then even if you do it successfully, you still have a lot of open questions about bridging and DAO mechanics and governance and voting and whatever, all these other things. So it's just very complicated. My suggestion for developers, at least for now, is pick one tech stack and own it. It will get easier to manage an app across multiple runtimes. Today, it is almost not even a thing. Although Aave just announced something like, I think, yesterday or 2 days ago. So hopefully that kind of pioneers the way a little bit. But I'd say focus on your tech stack.
Which tech stack would you choose if you were a developer starting today?
I mean, it depends on what is your goal in your audience and who are you building for. There's a lot of, at this point, the inertia in both ecosystems is, I think, clearly at escape velocity. So function of what you know as a dev and a few other things.
Georgios, what about you?
I think every company will need to have a multi-chain strategy if we're in a multi-chain world. If you're an Ethereum company already, you probably want to deploy on all the other EVM chains because it's just take your software, you deploy it, and you change nothing, and it's easy. When considering the multi-chain strategy and saying, should we deploy on Solana, Ethereum teams don't have Solana expertise or Rust expertise. So it is a bit harder, I think, for them to adapt or expand to them. So firstly, there's that. Secondly, developers in Solidity or in Ethereum, the EVM, we know very, very, very well how it works. Inside out, we know what its security properties are. We had 5 years of Ethereum vulnerabilities, and we're still going strong, unfortunately. But we know how the system works. And so as a new developer coming into the ecosystem, you're like, OK, what do people understand more? What security properties does the system have? How many blogs, tutorials, whatever there are? What is the tooling? What are the indexers, the ETLs, and so on? So all the peripheral infrastructure, also called, the moat, are very important. So if I was a new developer, typically I would say Solidity, but granted, I have my biases. But at the same time, I have seen smart Solidity developers who got tired of having to fight some of the EVM's idiosyncrasies, and they're like, OK, we like the Rust, we like high performance, low fees, so let's give it a try. But it requires a little more effort, and so I think the current, let's say, very good Solana developers are very, very, very good.
Yeah, indexing on Solana will become a lot easier very soon. There's an announcement later today on this with the graph.
I think it will be challenging.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Solana is definitely pushing bounds of what's possible on blockchains, but it's a good challenge.
Yeah.
Would love to kind of understand, are there any dark horses that exist on, a Polkadot or a Cosmos ecosystem that might have, layer 1 composability potentially sooner than Solana?
I mean, on Cosmos, there is already, there is a thing called Cosmalism, which lets you write smart contracts there. So right now, Terra has been the one that's been using it for a while, and Terra has been doing quite well. At the same time, there was a new chain, I believe, called Juno, which is going to be basically the Terra where people deploy contracts other than the core development team. So yeah, on other developer platforms like Polkadot, in Polkadot they've taken the strategy. Also in Cosmos there is also a chain called Evmos, which is basically the old Ethermint, which is you take the EVM and you put it on Cosmos, you use Tendermint and all that, which is a good tactic to go, a good go-to-market. Similarly in Polkadot, they have a way to write smart contracts, although I don't know many people using it. And most chains, they try to lean in on EVM compatibility. So I think Akala, Moonbeam, and 5 others, they all have that. But it's not differentiated, and there's not much traction over there.
Yeah, so I think, Tina, the original question was, where's composability going to happen next? I think as Georgios has suggested, the answer is clearly Cosmos. Seeing Terra and Osmo work together, and I think Terra's got a presence here as well, and I know they're trying to bridge into the Solana ecosystem effectively. So I think that's clearly happening now, and IBC has made that infinitely easier for those devs. I think the other ecosystem that is just very interesting to look at is Flow. There's just a lot of cool IP there. The DeFi infrastructure is still pretty lacking, but I think there's a lot of smart people starting to figure it out and build it. So keeping an eye on it.
And what about
we took a look at Flow smart contracts, and it doesn't look bad. Like all the developer experience looks solid.
It looks what?
It looks good. The developer experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and when EVM on Solana? I know Neon's kind of tackling this. Are there any other projects, and when do you think that will come to fruition?
I don't have any insights. I'm assuming the Neon team is here. If you want to talk to them, I'm sure you can find them, but I don't know.
Although getting compatibility is a very different thing from being like Ethereum or equivalent. We saw that with Optimism, a layer 2 project on Ethereum, that they initially tried to go for EVM compatibility and try to make it look as close to Ethereum as possible, but then other peripheral tooling started to not work great. And so, it may look like it's compatible for 60% or 70% of the use cases, but the very power usery type workflows, they tend to break, or you end up having to run into weird edge cases and so on. So I think the Neon team is great, but there is a lot of work to be done until we're there.
Absolutely. I know we've talked a lot about kind of like the blockchain ecosystem, but when I think about Solana, what I'm really excited about is going after NASDAQ and bringing all of Wall Street into the blockchain space. Can you speak a little bit about that? When will that happen, if ever? Do we need to solve MEV before institutions kind of come into the Solana ecosystem? What do you think?
You definitely don't need to solve MEV to get institutions using these systems. Trading on a permissionless system will incur costs that you don't have in a trusted environment. That will always be true. Gas costs, MEV costs, whatever. Institutions, for the most part, don't need those properties. So I don't think they care, and that's why there will always be centralized venues that provide trusted guarantees on execution. And there's a lot of people in the world who will be willing to incur the cost. Are incurring them today and will incur them in the future to get some of the benefits of being permissionless and decentralized. I don't think you're going to see big pension funds and endowments trading on Solana directly. That seems extremely unlikely, or any of these distributed systems. I think what's much more likely is you're just going to have 1 billion or 2 or 3 billion people all over the world trading social tokens and synthetic equities and whatever these other things are. And there's going to be market makers, obviously, providing liquidity in these assets. You'll have some AMMs, you'll have some order books, you'll have some things that cross both of those, like range orders, for example. And you'll need to provide liquidity wherever the retail flow goes.
Georgios?
Nothing to add.
Yeah. Okay, well, what are you most excited about as we kind of close out? What are you most excited about within the Solana ecosystem currently?
Anchor.
What was that?
Anchor, the development framework by Armani.
I am the most excited to see all of these things come together. So like DeFi, what DeFi Summer demonstrated was the amazing power of composability in the ERC20 standard, right? You could take an asset, go put it in Maker, make some DAI, go trade it on Uniswap, put it in Compound, lend it out. And what made all of that work was the ERC20 standard and Oracle price feeds for managing liquidations and such. And I think we're going to be able to take a lot of those concepts and extend them into NFTs, into social tokens, into games in really, really cool ways. Again, none of it is really live today. There's a couple of Polygon has a couple of cool things happening, as do some other ecosystems, but I don't think we've had that aha moment for the world of seeing composability hit a consumer-facing application in a meaningful way. And I really, really want to see that happen on Solana.
To also give one more data point from the developer perspective, I'm excited to see people learn Solana security. Because right now, if we're going to do all of these good things that Kyle has been talking about, we cannot do it if we don't know what we're building and if we get hacked and rugged and destroyed. So learn security.
Thank you to the security devs. I know your work is underappreciated.
Yeah.
We need you all to keep these things safe.
Absolutely. Well, give it up for Kyle and Georgios. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tegan.
Thank you.